Previously, Bobby Fischerman was challenged by the knight to a game of chess. After successfully defeating the knight, he received the enchanted key. He then proceeded to head into the festival towards the competition. When he arrived at the competition, he was just in time to hear the mayor going over the rules of the competition. And here's what the mayor said. He said there will be 2 qualification puzzles that all competitors must complete, and only if you solve both of those 2 puzzles correctly can you go to the next round of the competition. That's the elimination round, where you will be paired against other competitors in a head-to-head elimination match. But before we get there, you first have to solve these 2 puzzles correctly. And with that, he presented the competitors with the following position. So here's the first position that he presented with the competitors. It's white to play and draw the game, somehow not lose. White's pawns are going forward in this direction. Black's pawns are going in this direction. Now, before I tell you what Bobby Fischerman analyzed, if you would like to pause and try to figure it out on your own, go ahead and do that now. All right, well, if you had a chance to look at that, this is a very interesting position because we have some interesting tension between the pawns and also some potential of passed pawns that are going to be racing. So, for example, white could consider just capturing here. Of course, you can't capture here because then black simply takes here and gets a queen right away. So that's kind of out of the question. And so if you had a chance to look at this, maybe the obvious move that you thought of was you got to take this, right? Because if you don't take that, black's going to take you and get a queen, right? And this actually is the wrong move. And let me explain why this is the wrong move, and then we'll come back and talk about what the correct move was. So if you take here, here's what black is going to do. They're going to capture your pawn, and now we have a race. We have our passed pawn here. Black has their passed pawn here. And watch what happens if we kind of follow this out. So a4, g4, a5, g3, a6, okay. Black gets the queen first, but white does get a queen, and you might say this looks pretty good for white because you've got 2 pawns to black's 1 pawn. So what exactly is the problem here? Well, let me show you. Black is going to play the move queen to g8 check. And you only have 2 options with your king, here and here. Now, of course, you don't want to go to a7 because now you allow black the option to capture this pawn with check, and you really have a problem. So the only move here for white is king to b7. But now black will trade the queens, and black has a way to win from this position. If you would like to pause and try to figure it out from black's perspective, how does black win from this position? Well, if you had a chance to do that, the move is king to c6. So you have to go and use your king to slow down or stop these pawns. If you tried to just immediately push the pawn, well, then white's going to play king to a7 and then start pushing their pawn. And what's going to happen now is, look at this. Even though you get the queen, white also gets the queen with check, and this is actually going to be a draw. Even though white has the extra pawn over here, it's not enough. It's probably just going to end up in a perpetual check. So that's kind of the issue. You can't just rush with your pawn immediately. You don't make it fast enough. So you have to play king to c6 to try to stop these pawns. And now watch what happens. This is very interesting. The king's going to come up to try to come here and escort this pawn. And so you take that away. But now white has a nice move to try here, a4 check. And the point is that you want to lure black's king away so that your king can go and hunt down this pawn. So for example, after the king takes, now you bring your king to b6. Black's going to capture, and we get this race where the kings are running towards this pawn, okay? And if at any moment you try to push this, you have to ask yourself the question, can the white king get into the triangle? And the answer is yes. So for example, if black says, I'm going to push my pawn, look at this. You can actually make a box here, a box like this. And because the king can step into the triangle, white is able to catch the pawn. Okay, and if you would have done it on the previous move right here, well, now again, white's king is going to make a beeline for the box. And if you keep pushing, you say, well, he can't catch it, then white starts pushing this pawn. Okay, so however you look at it, white is kind of basically just in time. Okay, so because of that, going back here, you do have to accept this pawn, and then you do have to kind of run with your king over. Now watch what happens. This is interesting. Okay, all the way over. And right here, white now has a problem because you would like to be able to go over and catch the pawn, except you can't. And if you go here, which is your only try, little special rule about pawns, they can move twice, right? And this pawn is gone. And there's no en passant with a king. You can't do that, right? So you can't catch it. Black's going to win. So just to summarize that line, because I know that was a lot, here is what was happening. If, going all the way back to the beginning, if you capture this pawn and you go for that race where you push and black pushes, black is actually just going to trade off the queens. And then because the king can stop you, and eventually you get over there where you just have no way to get to the pawn, you can't save the game. So you might be saying, okay, Nelson, that's great, but what does white do instead? Well, now that you know the problem, see if you can find the solution. If you had a chance to look at that, the move is the amazing G6. And at first glance, it's like, what are we doing? Like, how does that help us? Well, here's the first point. If black decides to go for the capture here, now we're going to go for the capture, and we're both going to get queens, and this is going to be a draw. Okay, so that's good for white. That's what white's trying to do, get a draw, right? If black says, well, I'm not going to do that, I'm just going to take your pawn, now we go into the exact same line where we take and we get a pawn race, but it's different. And here is why it's different. So check this out. A4, G4, again, the pawns are racing. Pawns are racing. Black gets the queen first, white gets the queen. And the only thing that makes sense for black is to go for the same line. That's their best chance, because white does have an extra pawn. And if you let the queen come out, you're not really going to have any other options. So this is the best line for black. Check. Again, we get the trade. And again, black says, okay, king to c6, I'm stopping your pawns. We've seen this before. You might say, there's no difference. I mean, yes, the pawn is on h6, but who cares? It can still move here. Like, what's going on? Before I tell you, see if you could figure out what the difference is. All right, if you had a chance to look at that, let's go ahead and take a look. So king to a7, king to b5, a4 check, exact same line. King captures. And by the way, this is the best pawn to take because you have to take both pawns if you're black, and you want your king to end up as close to this direction as possible. So for example, if you took this pawn, your king is just, further away from where it wants to go when you take the other pawn, okay? So you do want to take this pawn first. And then the king's going to come to b6. And again, it looks very similar, right? We're going to get this race. The kings are racing, the kings are racing, the kings are racing. But wait a second. Do you remember in the last position, this pawn would have been right here, controlling this square, which forced the white king to go back that way. And then the pawn jumped ahead. But now, the pawn is no longer controlling the g6 square. The king just slides over and gets your pawn. And you can't get away because you can't move two spaces anymore, right? So it's a super subtle difference. But now you can see, if we go all the way back to the beginning, why throwing in this g6 move was the only way that white could save the game. If you don't do that, you're going to lose. But if you do this, you're just fine. Pretty fascinating study when you think about it. All right, so that was the first puzzle. Bobby Fischerman saw it correctly, presented the correct solution, and then he had to move on to the second puzzle to try to qualify for the elimination phase of the competition. And here was the second position that the mayor presented. White to play and win this one. White's pawns are going forward. Black's pawns are going this direction. Before I tell you what Bobby Fischerman found, if you would like to pause, how does white win this position? All right, well, if you had a chance to look at that, the only winning move in this position is the move rook to g7 check. Now, let's talk about a little bit why is that the only winning move and what's going on here. So obviously, when you look at this, you see black's queen, which is quite scary. But in addition to that, black has a passed pawn here, a passed pawn here, and this pawn, which could push here or even capture here. A lot of things that you have to worry about if you're white. So you do need to do something pretty forcing. But the good news for white is that black's king is already kind of stuck in the corner, right? It only has these two squares to go to. You've got a rook, you've got a knight, you've got your king, you've got this passed pawn. So you do have a lot of attacking opportunities. The first move is important, right? And so, for example, if you just tried kind of like a slower move, like just capturing this, with your pawn, it gives black time to start checking you with the queen. Okay, and this is one of the problems that you have to watch out for is Now you can't get away from the checks because you don't want to go here because you lose your rook. And so you have to go here to keep it defended. But then black just simply swings it back here again. And they're going to just keep putting you in check. You don't want to come up here because now you lose the game like this. And so you just have to go back and forth essentially. Okay, so that's kind of the problem with something just sort of simple like taking. Also, if you tried to bring your knight into the action to maybe set up a checkmate idea, you don't really have time. There's queen to b5 check. And again, you can see the queen causing a lot of problems. Okay, so because of that, you needed to play rook to g7 check to go ahead and force the king into the corner right away. And here, if you would like to pause, what's the follow-up move? Well, if you had a chance to look at that, it's the incredible rook to g8 check, giving up the rook for free. Now, some of you might have been tempted to say the move f7 because this looks like a very serious threat. And why wouldn't we push our pawn? Here is what black is going to do. Queen to b8 check, forces the king up. And then they're going to play the move f2, threatening to get another queen. And yes, we can stop that with our knight. But again, we have the problem where the queen is just going to constantly put us in check. And we actually can't get away from that. There's just too many places that the queen can move to that can put us in check. We can't get out of all the checks. So that's why we didn't have time to wait to push the pawn. We have to just go right away with the rook. Okay, and yes, we lose the rook for free, but we do lure the king over so to where we can follow up with the check. Okay, king has to go back. And now this one was pretty straightforward. You get the queen with check and you force a queen trade. Now you might be thinking, why do we want a queen trade? Don't we have a problem with these pawns? Well, you tell me. After black plays f2, about to get a queen, what do we do with white? Well, if you had a chance to look at that, the move is knight to e5, going for the checkmate on f7. Now, there is an interesting line here that you may have considered, knight to e3, trying to stop the pawn like this. But if you do this, watch what black can do. a4, and we have another problem over here. Our knight is tied to this, and this is happening, so we have to start pushing our g-pawn. Okay, so g4, g5, g6. Black's going to trade, sacrifice the queen so that they can go here. And actually, you might be wondering, why do they have to do that? If they go here right away, there's check. And let's see, there's a reason here. I actually don't remember what it was. What is it? Check. I think there's a checkmate. Yeah, there's a checkmate because the knight is involved. So it's queen to e6. And even though it looks like the king is escaping, they're actually not. You get this really nice checkmate. If they go here, that's checkmate. And if they go here, that's checkmate. And it has to do with the fact that the knight is helping the queen. So that's why, if we go back to here, black has to actually, sacrifice the queen first with check to lure that knight away. Then they get the queen over here. And now there's no more checkmate. The king just escapes. The knight is actually too far to help the queen. And this position is going to be a draw. Once black's queen gets into the action and starts checking, there's nothing white can do. Okay, so that was a good try, but it doesn't quite work. And because of that, that's why knight to e3 is the wrong move. Knight to e5 is the correct move, just going for the checkmate right away. So, of course, black's only option here is to get the queen with check. And then we play knight to f7, check, and it forces black to give up the queen. Okay, so we get this position, but we still kind of have a problem in that black's pawn is going to start pushing down the board. a4. And now if you would like to pause, what should we play now? Well, if you had a chance to look at that, this one's not too difficult because we don't really have a lot of options, right? These pawns are stuck. The king obviously can't catch the pawn. You can very quickly draw the box if you would like. Can our king get into this box? Not anywhere close. So we're clearly too far away from the pawn. So the only thing we can do is push our g-pawn. And this leads to a very nice finish, g6. And if black doesn't take us, well, actually, let me first show you if they take us. We take back. They get the queen. We go check. They don't want to take, or we just, take it back and still get a queen. So they come here, check, checkmate. Pretty nice, right? But also, going back here, if they decide to not take us and just get the queen right away, it's even more beautiful. G7, and we get a pawn checkmate with the king stuck in the corner. Pretty nice stuff. So yeah, congratulations if you saw that. Not an easy one to see. There was a lot of different tricky variations there that you had to kind of avoid, but the finish here with the pawn checkmate, super nice. Well, at this point, since Bobby Fischerman successfully solved both puzzles, the mayor said, "Congratulations to all of the competitors who advanced to the elimination phase of our puzzle tournament. This is where you will go head to head in battles against other participants, and only one of you can come out on top." And that's where we'll pick up our story next time. As always, thanks for watching. Stay sharp, play smart, and take care.